Casco Viejo has 4 main squares. Among them, Herrera Plaza is located in the wealthiest area of Casco Viejo. After undergoing many reconstructions, the old city currently contains a structure dating back from the late 19th, early 20th century. Among the ruins of the colonial buildings, one can see Art Deco buildings and other neoclassic architectural styles. Among the remarkable buildings stands the Municipal House. It was built by a rich banker in the early 20th century when the fortifications of the old town were demolished. And we arrive on a small square where the church of San Jose stands. This church is one of the major sights of the old town, though its sober exterior aspect doesn't suggest so. Indeed, the building contains the famous golden altar. This sculpted woodwork was covered in gold flakes. Its side altars, also made of sculpted wood, are also covered in gold flakes. They display a plethora of Baroque details. Not far from here, the Church of the Society of Jesus and its surrounding buildings were built around 1741 to welcome a school which later became a university. This university fulfilled its functions for only 20 years before the Jesuits were expelled from Panama in 1767. The church, which was never completed, was destroyed by a fire soon after. Plaza Bolivar, the 3rd largest square in the old town, is one of the city's most enjoyable spots. It's surrounded by many spectacular buildings, including the Columbia Hotel. Its color and its impressive neo-colonial structure, topped with 2 belvederes, don't go unnoticed. It overlooks the square's focal point, a commemorative monument of the Venezuelan General Simón Bolívar, the liberator of Latin America. The statue serves as a reminder of his arrival here in 1826 for the first Pan-American Congress, which aimed to unify Latin America in order to better resist the Spanish colonial government. Behind the statue stands the romantic church of St. Francis of Assisi. Built in the 17th century, it survived many fires, and its bell tower even collapsed. Having been closed for a long time, it was completely modified and recently restored. Still on Bolivar Square, the eponymous palace currently houses the country's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This is where the movement orchestrated by Simón Bolívar worked to rally Mexico, Central America, and Greater Colombia. This building also housed the government of Greater Colombia in the 19th century, when Panama City was its capital. Next to the palace stands the National Theatre of Panama. It was inaugurated in 1908. Its neoclassic facade is made up of 6 arcades, crowned by statues of the Muses, and homages to Wagner, Shakespeare, Molière, Rossini, Cervantes, and Lope de Vega. The Santo Domingo Church has been in ruins for a long time. Built in 1678, it was destroyed by fire less than 100 years later, and it was never rebuilt. Another square in the historical district, Francia Plaza, was built in 1922 to honor the French as the pioneers of the Panama Canal's construction. Among the notable buildings on the square stands the French Embassy. France was one of the very first countries to recognize Panama's independence in 1903. The National Institute of Culture also stands on the square. It was designed by the same architect who built the Municipal Palace and the National Theatre. At the centre of the square, a monument was built in honour of the canal's creator, Ferdinand de Lesseps, and in honour of France. The obelisk, at the centre, reaches 18 metres high and is topped by a rooster, a symbol of France. In this historical district, listed a UNESCO World Heritage Site, you can purchase the traditional Panama hat. At that time, the central point of this new city was occupied by the Plaza Mayor, today called Independence Square. It was the city's hub over the course of many centuries, and it's surrounded by major buildings, including the Metropolitan Cathedral. The Metropolitan Cathedral, or Sacred Heart Cathedral, was built from 1688 to 1796. Its construction spanned over more than a century. Its stone walls are sculpted in Renaissance style and decorated with classic elements. This is typically called the Jesuit style. This cathedral, which represented the most influential religious institution of colonial Panama, has bell towers which were, for a long time, the highest bell towers in all of Latin America. The Municipal Palace dates back to the early 20th century. It's in neoclassic style. Its peak is guarded by sculptures representing wisdom and trade, as well as agriculture and work. Its facade is adorned with mouldings. The Central Panama Hotel, also on Independence Square, was built nearly 150 years ago. Listed on UNESCO's World Heritage List, it has been recognized as the country's best hotel. As we can see, Independence Square, located in the old town of Panama City, is surrounded by beautiful colonial buildings like this one here, which houses the Emerald Museum and stands beside the former residence of Panama's first president, Amador Guerrero. The Neue Marktplatz, or the New Marketplace, was founded during the Middle Ages. It was established to support the former trade of flour, since it was not enough to feed the whole city. At the centre rises the Providencia Fountain, a Mannerist allegory of foresight and good government. Such as the rest of the city, the buildings of the Neue Market were rebuilt in Baroque style at the beginning of the 17th century. Not far away, the Capuchin Church, while Baroque, offers an extremely simple facade. Dating from the beginning of the 17th century, Emperor Ferdinand II chose this church as the burial site for the great Austrian family, the Habsburgs, and was entombed here in 1637. The crypt contains the tombs of this family that reigned over the Holy Roman Empire and Austria, as well as Hungary and Bohemia. Today, the Capuchin crypt contains 149 bodies, including 12 emperors and 19 empresses and queens. There are also 4 urns that contain hearts. The custom of the Habsburg burial ceremonies has always been to separate the body, the entrails, and the hearts of the deceased. The 3 parts were then often placed in the crypts of different churches. Among the remarkable tombs, we can see the double sepulchre of the 18th century Austrian power, Maria Theresa and her husband Francis I, Empress and Emperor of the Holy Roman Germanic Empire, which was ruling over Europe. course, we can also see the sepulchre of Elizabeth of Bavaria, called Sissi, and her husband Franz Joseph I, who died after the First World War. He had ruled the country for 68 years. He did not witness the fall of the imperial power. Sissi was murdered by an Italian anarchist in Geneva. She was leaving her hotel undercover, and the man ran into her with a knife. She was 61 years old and was taking a rest in the city. Next to them, their son Rudolf's tomb, also the victim of a violent death at the age of 30. Today, we still do not know if he was murdered or if he killed himself. The night of his burial, Sissi cried for a very long time, and she could be heard everywhere in this huge vault. The loss of her son left a wound in her heart for the rest of her life. The latest descendant to have been buried here was Otto van Habsburg on July the 16th, 2011. And currently, there are still 3 places left. On the other side of Vienna's historic centre is the Freyung, a square that is full of history. In its centre is the inevitable fountain representing the Austrian Empire, symbolised by a woman held up by 4 rivers, including the Danube. But this square had a special vocation. In Freyung, there is the word frei, which means free. Its name is a reminder that here, in the Middle Ages, they granted the right of asylum to travellers and fugitives. It was guaranteed by the Scottish Benedictine monastery. The large monastic complex is covered with a white-yellow render and is topped with an onion dome. The convent church was founded by Scottish Benedictine monks in the 12th century. During the Middle Ages, Scottish missionaries contributed greatly to the spread of Christianity in continental Europe. The Scottish monasteries developed in many places. Amongst them is the Monastery of the Blessed Virgin, here in Vienna, which was built in 1158. After many transformations, the original Romanesque church was replaced by a Baroque church in the 17th century. Then, in the 19th century, the high altar was made with Innsbruck glass mosaics. Its iconography depicts Mary, the holy patron of the church. The Church of the 9 Choirs of Angels, built in the 14th century, displays a facade that was reworked in the 17th century, inspired by the purist Baroque style. When the popes visit the city, they bless the people of Vienna from its balcony. The interior was entirely reconditioned in the neoclassical style at the end of the 18th century and into the 19th. The high, hexagonal pillars support the beautiful barrel vault created by the architect Johann Amann. This beautiful historic church, while still Baroque, is a little less full than its sister churches in Vienna. Its main altar is dedicated to the patron of the church, Mary, surrounded by 9 choirs of angels. On the other side of the square, Karlskirche, or St. Charles's Church, with its ellipsoidal dome, is considered the most remarkable Baroque religious building in the capital. With historical architecture, the facade corresponds to the portico of a Greek temple, and the model for the 2 columns was Trajan's column in Rome. After a great plague epidemic in the early 18th century, Emperor Charles VI pledged to build a church dedicated to Charles Borromeo, a missionary who was revered as a healer of plague victims. The large altarpiece describing the ascension of the saint is a masterpiece of light. On the interior, the decorative program is characterized by the use of marble and gold leaf. The fresco on the dome depicts the Archbishop Charles Borromeo, held by the Virgin Mary and surrounded by the cardinal virtues. Borromeo was one of the main protagonists in the fight against the Protestants, along with Ignatius of Loyola and Philip Neri during the Inquisition. He is the one who separated the sexes at worship. This fresco was made by Johann Michael Rothmeier, one of the first Baroque painters in Vienna.
Edna is a Maya site located 60 kilometers south of the city of Campeche in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. The origins of the city date back to the 7th century BC. Archaeological digs have revealed that the city flourished in the Classic period, in the 7th century AD, and that it then had a population of at least 30,000. The site includes many structures built around the ceremonial center. The most imposing is the House of Grimaces, built on the central Acropolis. It was built on a 40-meter-high pyramidal structure, which includes 5 floors. The main staircase has 65 steps that rise to the top of the structure where the temple stands, topped by a ridge crown. The first 4 floors below the temple were inhabited by priests. Originally a modest rural town, the city became a political, economic, and religious center of prime importance. The power of the ruling class was justified by its close relationship with divine forces. At the foot of the steps of the House of Grimaces, the 80 hieroglyphs representing cultural masks evoke this religious power. The House of Grimaces overlooks the Great Acropolis, at the center of which stands a platform called Temascal. It may have been used in religious or sacrificial rituals. The central square, running 160 meters long and 100 meters wide, displays superb structures made of limestone, like the North Temple here. These give us a better idea of the city's extraordinary political, economic, and religious power. Opposite it stands the Moon Temple, where the divinities of the night were worshipped. This temple reminds us that of all the ancient calendars of the world, those of the Mayan civilization were the most complex and the most precise. The Maya believed that the movements of the sun and the moon were guided by the gods, who needed men in their sacred rituals to help the universe overcome the forces of evil. Facing the Temple of Masks, a patio served as an entrance to the Great Acropolis. It is made up of 4 buildings and is flanked by 2 small pyramids. Outside, 2 sakbis, alleys covered in white stone, run through a great esplanade. A great administrative house stood in the back of this esplanade, atop huge stands which enabled the people to attend the ceremonies that took place on the Acropolis. To its right, another temple was built, also on a pyramidal structure. It has been named South Temple because its definitive purpose has not yet been identified with certainty. Just beside it, the Mayan ball court is readily identifiable. Games between 2 or more players took place here between 2 parallel structures. They had to pass the ball through the hoop without using either hands or feet. This ritual was usually followed by the sacrificial death of the defeated team. On the other side of the great esplanade, lined with seats, stands a great platform, on top of which a building used to stand. This was the knife platform, originally painted red. It owes its name to the silex blades that were found buried here. Further away stands another temple whose purpose is unknown. It displays atypical round columns. At its peak, the site of Edna stretched out over a surface area of approximately 25 square kilometers. In the year 1000, it started becoming decadent and the city was looted by unknown invaders. The decline continued and culminated in the absolute desertion of the site around 1450. The site was rediscovered in 1907. The first archaeological digs, undertaken in 1958, do not explain the decline and desertion of the city, which remain a mystery to this day. The ruins found in Paraguay, South America, tell an unusual story in the history of the continent's colonization by the Spanish in the 17th century. The conquerors entrusted the clergy, and especially the Jesuits, with pacifying the native peoples, who had, up until then, been very hostile towards the colonizing government. In order to do so, the Jesuits established local missions called reductions between 1609 and 1763. These missions had a utopic social organization that has no equivalent in all of history. San Ignacio is the second of the 11 missions that were established in Paraguay. The decor of the main buildings, namely the church, the cemetery, and the school, are in Baroque style and serve to educate and convert the indigenous peoples. These buildings stand along a vast plaza that is surrounded by houses on its 3 other sides. The streets, the houses, everything was ordered according to precise geometric lines, in accordance with the Spanish way of building new cities. Establishing their place of residence in a central position enabled the priests to always watch over the entire reduction. To reach their goal and integrate the Guaranis, the Jesuits first had to find similarities between the Native American shamanism and Catholic religion. This they did find, in particular concerning the end of the world and paradise. While the Guaranis proved flexible, their new faith remained fragile, for they never completely gave up their ancient beliefs. Another problem lied in the fact that the Native Americans refused to pay a tax to Madrid, the conqueror. So the Jesuits decided to establish autonomous territories in which the Native Americans would be exonerated from this tax. They themselves, the clergy, would pay in their place, while the indigenous peoples would work for them. In this way, the missionaries' interests converged with the political interests of Madrid. The General Superior of the Jesuits, Acquaviva, came to an agreement with Philip III, who authorized the Jesuits of America to found an autonomous state in Paraguay and to gather up the Native Americans in the reductions. The word reduction evoked both sedentarization within an urban area and submission to the church. The local governor received orders to conquer the Guarani natives not through force of weaponry, but to win them over only with sermons and with the religious teachings dispatched on site for this purpose. Furthermore, it was specified that the Native Americans who were converted to Christianity could not be made slaves and were to remain exempted from taxes for a 10-year period. The Native Americans were to remain as free as the Spanish. The Mission Santísima Trinidad de Paran, built in 1706, is an exceptional example of the Jesuit missions built in this region between the 17th and 18th centuries. The walls are made of a local red sandstone with a width of more than 2 meters. This enabled the buildings to survive 200 years of neglect. The robustness of the defensive tower reveals the care that was taken in constructing the buildings. The urban site is made up of the ruins of a church, houses, a school, shops, and open spaces, such as gardens and orchards. Here, too, the ruins represent a fusion of cultures in which the process of Christianization enabled the population to preserve elements of their traditional culture in order to better embrace the new culture brought by the Westerners. Originally roughly made out of wood, the churches were later built of brick and stone. Before that could happen, the Jesuits had to teach the indigenous people the art of masonry and stone cutting. While this architecture can seem a bit crude, it nonetheless reveals the talent of the indigenous people who learned these European techniques. This architectural fusion came to be called Guarani Baroque. And the Guaranis proved to be very skilled in manual crafts like sculpture and woodwork. Later on, sophisticated objects such as watches and musical instruments came to be produced in the missions. And these artisanal products were exported as much as agricultural products. The Jesuits had established a society based on sharing. The land was divided into two sectors, private and communal. While the private sector preserved its traditional role, the communal sector was of first importance in the economy of the reductions, since only the communal land enabled trade and tax payments to the King of Spain. The communal land was used to grow cotton and sugarcane, among other crops, using modern techniques, which led to an increase in productivity. All of the mission's residents worked the communal land, and except for the commercialized goods, production was equally divided among all. The economy of the reductions quickly flourished. The reduction of Jésus de Tavarang, founded quite late in 1760, shelters the greatest church of South America built in that period. At that time, the Jesuit missions had attained their peak, with 140,000 Catholic Native Americans in approximately 30 missions. For 150 years, the reductions carried on, nearly cut off from the outside world, with a unique mode of organization never seen before or since in all of history. Guided by the Jesuits, the Native Americans benefited from advanced laws. The death penalty was abolished, and the workday was about 6 hours, compared to 12 to 14 in Europe at the same time. Guarani society became the first society in the world to have a 100% literacy rate. But success feeds jealousy, and the missions were attacked and terribly decimated by the Spanish settlers, who sought slaves. When Spain and Portugal agreed to share and divide the Americas up between each other, Paraguay passed to Portuguese domination, and this rang the death toll of the free missions. The Jesuit order was expelled from the country in 1767. The indigenous people then returned to the forest, and the churches fell to ruin. The Guaranis themselves have nearly completely disappeared today. Though they sunk into oblivion, buried below the tropical vegetation, these ruins, remnants of the social utopia in this era, were rediscovered in 1897. They were declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1993. Between Noplio and Corinth, Tiryns is an ancient Mycenaean city. In the upper part of the hill, called the Citadel, stands a Mycenaean palace dating back to 2000 BC. There are also remains of a Cyclopean surrounding wall. The stones of the wall are up to 3 meters long and 1 meter wide. A path running under a tumulus leads to a tomb. This royal tomb, in a shape of a beehive, also reveals true skill in the art of construction. Not far from here, another site from the same civilization contains a big number of remains. It is the site of Mycenae, which gives its name to Mycenaean civilization. First of all, the grave circle. Numerous royal sepulchres were found within the two stone circles. Some of these are pit graves topped with a stone slab or a stele. The funerary materials found here, bones, arrowheads, daggers, masks, and jewels, indicate that the war chiefs and their families were buried here. The material and iconography of the graves revealed that Mycenae was governed by a rich warrior aristocracy whose representatives were of superior size and physical strength. The city was governed by a monarch called Wanaka. We do not know much about the civilization which emerged around 1700 BC. It came from the north during the Bronze Age and invaded all of Greece. Nevertheless, they are at the origins of Greek civilization, and Homer related the epic story of their king, Agamemnon, in the Trojan War. The disappearance of this civilization cannot be explained with precision. The causes of this are probably both external, with earthquakes that might have displaced bodies of water and outside raids of new populations, and internal, with an overly centralized and overly rigid administration, incapable of surmounting new crises. Just like in Tiryns, the city is enclosed by a cyclopean surrounding wall with 2 points of access. The Lion Gate and the Trilith makes up the main entrance. It has an enormous lintel topped with a relieving triangle slab on which 2 lionesses are carved, standing on either sides of the central pillar. The complex dates back to 1250 BC. The royal palace, accessed by a very steep path, is located at the highest point of the citadel. There are few remains, but it seems to have been composed of 3 rooms, 2 vestibules and a ceremonial room that contained a circular central fireplace and a throne. The palace overlooked other buildings of smaller size, as well as modest houses and the district of artisans. The Mycenaean period was a time of great prosperity in the Peloponnese. Its fleet controlled the seas and traded with Sicily, Crete, Syria, and Egypt. But there are so few traces of this civilization that the origins of such wealth can only be a matter of speculation. Conversely, some hypothesize that there were lootings or that mercenaries who left to combat the pharaohs and Hittites returned. A series of tholos tombs was also built on the slopes of the hill for the king's reigning year. The design is the same as in Tiryns. A corridor runs through the hill, and it is supported through the use of cantilevering. It has been estimated that over a year of work was required to erect such a sepulchre. This goes to show the importance given to funerary monuments. A bit further away among the ruins, the best preserved and the most spectacular tomb is undoubtedly that of King Agamemnon's. It is also named the Treasury of Atreus. The tholos was accessed by an inclined and uncovered entrance, or dromos, made of dry stone walls and spanning a length of 36 kilometers. Like the other royal tombs, the Treasury of Atreus is made up of a subterranean circular room with a corbel arch covering that is ogival in section. 13.5 meters high and 14.5 meters wide, it was the biggest dome in the world for over 1,000 years. The inside was decorated in gold, silver, and bronze. The ruins of Mycenae truly nourish our imagination due to the few things we know about this civilization of archaic Greece.
The Château of Breteuil is located in Choiseul in the Chevreuse Valley, 35 kilometers south of Paris. The château displays its 17th century architecture, consisting of a square courtyard that is entirely surrounded by buildings, with 2 corner pavilions and a central body at the back of the courtyard. Built in 1610, the château is home to the family of the Marquis de Breteuil, who served Kings Louis XIV, Louis XV, and Louis XVI. Their coat of arms, a golden sparrow hawk on an azure background, floats on the roof. Their motto, neither by hope nor by fear. The Château of Breteuil has been classified as a historical monument since 1973. Located in the heart of the Chevreuse Valley Nature Reserve, the château contains several gardens and a 75-hectare park that opens onto the forest. The Breteuil family, very visible in the court, improved and embellished the château over time. One of the ancestors of the Breteuil family received the title of Count of Breteuil from William the Conqueror. Later on, the Breteuil continued to serve the church as bishops and the kings of France as officers, ambassadors, and ministers. They also served France under the different republics. In the hunting pavilion, which has been turned into a gallery of the ancestors, we can meet a family who has been part of history for quite a long time. One of the illustrious ancestors, Louis de Breteuil, was the Minister of Finance during the reign of King Louis XIV. He was thus the first in the family to have risen to the rank of minister. Later on, during the reign of Louis XVI, another Breteuil would also be minister, and the painting of this king, who was very important for the family, has pride of place in the gallery. On another wall, there is the portrait of another king, Louis XVIII, who is shown covered in fleur-de-lis, the emblem of the French royalty since the Middle Ages. During his reign in the 19th century, a Breteuil was once again minister. As you can see, the Breteuil family has close ties to royalty. The Château of Breteuil is above all a family home that has passed down from generation to generation. It has been entirely furnished and decorated since the 18th century, which makes it very lively and authentic. Each room tells a story. This room takes its name from the 4 tapestry panels embroidered with gold that were created at the Gobelin manufactory and depict the 4 seasons. The visit continues, and room after room, the genealogy appears on the walls. The Abbot of Breteuil and his sister Émilie are the children of Baron Louis-Nicolas de Breteuil, who had a large diplomatic role under Louis XIV. His daughter, Émilie de Breteuil, was, for the era, the model of an emancipated woman. Married to the Marquis du Châtelet, she was a very close friend of the French writer and philosopher Voltaire, and they formed one of the most famous couples of the 18th century. In this family chateau, there is a profusion of furniture and objects that dress every room, like this backgammon game, which was very fashionable. A glimpse into the everyday life of the people who lived in the chateau is possible thanks to the presence of the furniture, living rooms, bedrooms, studies, luxurious tableware, and even the bathrooms, like this one that dates from the 19th century, an era when there was no running water. Magnificently furnished, the great originality of the Château of Breteuil is the way it displays the everyday life of this family at the heart of French history, with the help of 50 wax statues created by the Grévin Museum in Paris. A military man and then diplomat, Henri de Breteuil was placed in the smoking room. During his diplomatic career, Henri de Breteuil was close to the presidents Gambetta and Clemenceau. And another room in the chateau still bears the traces of his friendship with a future King of England. In the dining room, the Prince of Wales, who then became King Edward VII, honoured the family with a visit in 1905. Another comet that crossed the Breteuil galaxy was the French writer Marcel Proust, who often came to visit Henri at the Château. He even drew inspiration from the Marquis to create a character for his famous novel, Swan's Way. In the music room, there is an odd orchestra made up of automatons. The chairs are decorated with embroideries of La Fontaine's fables. In the Egyptology room, they display the very rare collection, The Description of Egypt, during Emperor Napoleon I's campaign. In the early 20th century, Henri de Breteuil carried out major renovation works in the chateau and its gardens, where he returned it to the French formal style in its best tradition. The landscapers established great perspectives, especially thanks to the placement of a pond called the Water Mirror on the north side, overlooking the Chevreuse Valley. They embellished the lawns and pathways and created gardens with boxwood embroideries. The Duchesne landscapers followed in the tradition of André Le Nôtre, the great gardener of the Château de Versailles. This classical style renovation integrates subtly with the existing structure of the site. The romantic ponds at the foot of the estate were laid out under the Emperor Napoleon III. Nature lovers fall in love with the calmness and beauty of the site. The Château of Breteuil and its park make it possible for visitors to get away and unwind in the heart of nature, only 35 kilometers away from Paris. A visit to Breteuil is an invitation not only to dream, but also to a reality that brings history and culture to life in a very concrete manner. The 100,000 visitors each year are certainly proof. Venice is undoubtedly the most romantic of all cities, the city of Casanova, the city of lovers. With its palaces and monuments, its artistic and architectural treasures, Venice charms one and all thanks to its sumptuous setting and thanks to the incomparable atmosphere of its canals and bridges. Flanking the entrance to the Grand Canal, the Doge Palace, or the Palace of the Dukes, was the official residence of the first magistrates of the Venetian Republic. They were elected by their noble peers. From 697 to 1797, the city had 120 Doges. Their main functions included declaring war and peace, commanding the armies, naming civil servants and members of the clergy, and presiding over the Senate. The palace has an interior courtyard, and one of its walls has a door which connects with San Marco's Basilica. It's the so-called clock facade. Completed in 1618, it displays 6 luxurious Roman statues whose significance has since evaporated with time. To the right, the grandiose Staircase of Giants leads to the inside and to the famous Golden Staircase, which rises to the upper halls. It derives its name from the sumptuousness and magnificence of its decorations, but also because it was reserved for the nobles. While the palace's architecture is Gothic on the whole, its interior decorations, which were redesigned throughout time and following multiple fires, definitely hail from the Renaissance. At the top of the staircase, a square vestibule, was the ceremonial entrance used by foreign ambassadors and senators headed to the council. On the ceiling, painted by Tintoretto, the Doge is represented receiving a sword and the scale of justice. This room, which was used as an antechamber and as a passageway, contains beautiful paintings, including one of a Doge kneeling before religion, represented by the Virgin Mary and saints. Another painting depicts the arrival of King of France Henry III in Venice in 1574. The purpose of this visit, rare enough to be highlighted, was purely touristic. A painting by the artist Tiepolo displays a homage to Neptune, the sea god according to Venice, then a maritime power. The doors are topped by allegorical statues and the ceiling is magnificently decorated in stuccos by Vittoria and Bombarda and paintings by Tintoretto. At its inception, the Senate chamber welcomed representatives of the people. But little by little, these representatives were replaced by nobles, and this is where they voted on the decisions taken by the Doge. Here too, the decorations are sumptuous. On the throne's panel, a painting by Tintoretto depicts two Doge kneeling before the corpse of Christ. He also painted the divine incarnation of Venice sitting in the clouds among different divinities. The compass room also displays beautiful paintings, among them one of Donato kneeling before the Virgin, the Doge who opposed the Pope. The Grand Council Chamber is the biggest room of the Doge Palace. It's 54 meters long, 25 meters wide, and over 15 meters high. While this room displays a surprising, superb and grandiose style today, if only thanks to its artistic decorations, it's easy to imagine how imposing it must have seemed when the Doge officiated here, surrounded by his 500 senators and numerous councillors. The portraits of the 76 Doge who reigned from the year 810 to 1554 are among the paintings on display here. Furthermore, numerous historical paintings depict the significant political or military events of the Republic. Among them, the naval battle of Salvatore between the Venetians and the troops of the German Emperor Frederick I Barbarossa, who wanted to annex Italy in the 12th century. The Venetians, who allied with the Pope for the occasion, inflicted a resounding defeat upon him. The painting that is rich in details is by Tintoretto. Jacopo Robusti, called Tintoretto, was a Renaissance painter. He was born and died in Venice in the 16th century and is often associated with the artistic mannerism movement of the Venetian school. This disciple of Titian was reputed for having surpassed his master in his mastery of colours and shading. Beyond the paintings of Tintoretto, the room displays paintings by Veronese, Palma the Young, Jules d'Almoro, and many more. But the most famous painting, again by Tintoretto, is displayed on the wall behind the throne. It is the largest painting in the world, namely the Glory to Paradise. It's a vast artwork which measures nearly 25 meters long and 10 meters high. A great star at the time, the painter was not concerned about the historical characters displayed in the work. He represented paradise in a rather disorganized composition, which looks more like a whirlwind of Venetian festivities rather than the unknown world in which the Catholic Church saw a greater state of sobriety. Built starting in 1340, the Doge Palace is undoubtedly the most beautiful building of Venice.